Hi, I'm Steve Kep, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. In today's webinar, we'll be exploring a really timely topic, which is about how technology is changing employee experience. Today, tech is informing nearly every aspect of our lives, at work, at home, at school, and in a lot of cases, these are all in the same place at the same time. We were already going through a digital transformation, but the pandemic has turned the process into kind of a theme park ride, at times thrilling, at other times scary and disorienting. In the long run, this surge of innovation is transforming how workers do their jobs. How can companies stay in touch with how employees are adapting to these changes? What tools and methods help their productivity and what factors interfere with it? And what are the best ways to integrate multiple new digital tools? Before we dive into this topic, we'd like to thank our partners LumApps and AceUp. I'll tell you a bit about them. LumApps is a social and collaborative enterprise communication platform designed to connect, inform, and engage employees, no matter where they're working. This innovative digital workplace equips organizations to break down silos, to streamline internal communication, and to provide a space for employees to belong and have a purpose. Fully integrated with your productivity suite, LumApps simplifies access to all corporate content, business apps, and social features in one place. AceUp empowers professionals at all levels to maximize their impact through transformational coaching, enabled by technology, empowered by science, and backed by data. AceUp combines the power of one-on-one executive coaching, group training, and behavioral technology to foster a culture of coaching within organizations. What that does is to drive systemic change and enable top talent and leaders to master essential business and leadership competencies. Now, a few logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event, so you can look out for an email in about 24 hours with a link to that video. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management. And look out for a written account of the conversation soon on our website at fromday1.co. At around 3 p.m. Eastern Time, the top of the hour, we'll have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, business journalist Lydia Dishman, who reports and edits for Fast Company, focusing on tech and leadership, and has written for CBS Money Watch, Fortune, Popular Science, The Guardian, and the New York Times, among others. So Lydia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you, audience, for spending your time with us this afternoon. I am sure you're going to get a lot of valuable insights from our panelists today, so thanks for sticking with us. What Steve said at the beginning, I think, was really interesting about it being a roller coaster ride. We've all been learning to adapt to this new way of working with no roadmap and a lot of uncertainty. But here are some things that we know. According to Salesforce data, working from home as a result of the pandemic has only made a 1% reduction on productivity at work. On the flip side of that, Microsoft data suggests that weekend work is spiking. Microsoft Team chats on Saturday and Sunday have increased over 200%. And another piece of Microsoft data suggests that due to high levels of sustained concentration, fatigue begins to set in about 30 or 40 minutes into a video meeting. I hope this video meeting will not fatigue you after 40 minutes because we're on for an hour and a half. But that said, looking at days filled with video meetings, stress begins to set in about 2 hours into the day. And we've all heard the dismal statistics about burnout at this point. At that said, companies are trying to meet the needs of their workers the best way they can. Boston Consulting Group found that 75% of executives agreed that they regard digital transformation as becoming more urgent in light of the COVID crisis, and 65% said they anticipate increasing their investments in digital transformation. Bain research finds that more than 80% of companies are accelerating automation in response to COVID. So to discuss the impact of these trends with me are this group of insightful professionals who are in the trenches and observing best practices in real time. So I'd like to go around and have them introduce themselves. Briefly, tell us about your role and how many people are working in your organization remotely. Chris, let's start with you.
Sure, thank you. I'm Chris Doucet. I am director of the ACE Foundation, which is the charitable arm of ACE Hardware, but I also oversee employee engagement. for our corporate field and care center. So I do not oversee any of our stores, our 5,000 stores across the country, just to be clear. This is just our, mostly our corporate folks here in Chicago. And I'd say how many of us are working remotely? So typically in a normal life, whatever that is anymore, here in Chicago on our campus, we have just about 1,100 employees. I would say 95% of them are working from home. That's been our request. We want people to stay safe. However, our offices never closed because we were deemed essential. Hardware stores were deemed essential. So our headquarters had to stay open. I'm sitting in our offices right now. It's just a little different. There's not many people here and a lot of safety protocols. But I would say the vast majority of our corporate field and care center folks are working remotely.
Thank you. Jamie, let's go over to you next with your Christmas tree.
Yes, great. Well, thank you for having me. So I'm the director and lead the talent, learning, and DEI work at Whitecap. And similar to Christine, we were an essential business. So we have a vast majority of our workforce that's in our 300 plus locations across the US and Canada that still have to report into work every day. And we have taken a lot of PPE and other COVID kind of restrictions in those stores. But just like Christine, we probably had about 10% of our corporate workforce working remotely before COVID, and now it's probably 99%. So it's been a big change for our company.
Big changes for everyone. Laura, how about you next?
Sure. Thanks, Lydia. I'm Laura Sewell, and I am the Vice President of HR for North America within Avanade. Avanade is a joint venture between Microsoft and Accenture Consulting. We're headquartered in Seattle and really focused on providing services and solutions to clients, utilizing the best of what Microsoft has to offer. Within North America, we have approximately 3,000 employees, most of whom were mobile or traveling to client sites or office-based prior to the pandemic. Now, we all work at home. We have limited restricted office access for essential staff only, and that's upon appointment. But generally speaking, we have transitioned our entire workforce and working with our clients to transition remotely.
And the beat goes on. Joey, how about you next?
Yeah, hi, my name is Joey Levi. I am the head of pre-sales for North America at LumApps. And of course, you heard about our company when you first joined. As a software company, we have a lot of remote employees, but during COVID, everybody went 100% remote. We reopened offices, I think, back in late September, but most people are still remote and some people are going to offices. And then the usual things are in place to keep people safe. And I would say that, what's interesting about being in sales specifically is that, and we'll talk about this most likely during the session, is that with that remote work, it changes the way that you have to structure how you talk to prospects and how you talk to customers. Because like in our personal lives with, video meetings, I think if I'm like anybody else, I did a lot of personal Zoom meetings early on, and then they all stopped because everyone got really exhausted by them. So I'm interested to hear other comments about that. Thanks.
Yeah, we definitely are going to dig into that, especially because now that we've had, most of us, the benefit of 9 months of doing this. It's interesting to see what's come up and what's taken what's place. Micha, last but not least.
Thank you, Lydia. I am Micha Mros. I am the HR technology leader within the HR consulting practice at Hub International. So my team deals on a regular basis with all that is human capital management and all that you can do to engage your employees with your human capital management system. My team is remote and has been remote since it's existed. However, the majority of Hub International did report into an office. And so there's over 10,000 employees who are now deployed home. Again, they have limited access to their office by appointment only, but everybody has successfully transitioned home.
That's what I love to hear, successful transitions. especially in light of some of these numbers. It makes me nervous for, how much work people are putting in, especially now the commute times are evaporated. So let's talk about just the real basics. What's changed overall about the technology that you use to communicate, especially between supervisors and reports, but also among company leadership down to the entire workforce? So I'm going to go around the room again. So let's start with Chris again.
Sure. So I guess what hasn't changed? We were a very in-person, hands-on, in the office, a lot of meetings, in-person meetings, and that all went away, obviously. And so, but our mission didn't change in that since our stores were open, our role is to support our store owners. These are independent store owners across the country. There's 5,000 of them. We couldn't really skip a beat. So they had to be able to contact us while we were home, and we had to work with each other. So it was kind of twofold. So I think it was one thing talking to teams about staying in touch and connected with your individual teams, absolutely, because there was a lot of uncertainty, especially in the beginning. But then, and I know we'll get into what platforms we decided to go with, but then it was also hearing from our CEO. And I remember our first kind of town hall, because we used to have several town halls where we'd all be at a big, hotel ballroom, and we couldn't do that. And I know our first one, there was no video. He just did audio. And I messaged him immediately and I'm like, you got to show your face. People want to see you and trust you. And it was all good, but it was amazing the feedback we got when we were still learning. Then when we turned on that video the next time, people were so relieved to see him and they felt the sense of peace. So I think we learned early on the value of seeing people's faces for sure. But then little things like the phone, your office phone went away. And so when store owners are trying to call us, how does that work? And so we had to all get soft phones installed on our laptops, and that's been life-changing. So little things like that, technology pieces that were not on our radar, we had to figure out pretty quickly.
Yeah, you have to figure it out quickly, and you have to figure out what's accessible to everyone wherever they are. Jamie, you're nodding your head. So did you have a similar experience?
Well, I was going to say it's very similar given our model too of having, a workforce across many locations in the U.S. and being a very traditional industry in the construction industry. And, having to move things that we would fly for a 1-hour meeting and fly people in from all over the US to having virtual Zoom succession planning sessions, right? So these are things that we traditionally felt like you had to be in person to see each other. And then teaching, the organization and the leaders who are becoming more familiar with Zoom and some other technologies, how to do it and how to engage on the camera, right? Because to that point, like a 3-hour session, how do you keep it motivating and people engaged without getting distracted or going off camera? So setting some of those rules and kind of expectations for being on camera too was a new thing for our organization as well.
Laura, you already had the benefit of working with Microsoft, a suite of products. So, I mean, was there even a transition for you?
There sort of was. So you're right. So we were fortunate enough that we've always utilized the whole Microsoft suite of technologies for communication and collaboration. That is fundamentally at the heart of our company. But we also did have a strong resilience on, a vibrant office culture. So really what I've seen shift the most over the past year or 9 months has been an increased use of video, both live and recorded. So because I think we were often face-to-face with clients or face-to-face in the office, often when we were utilizing Microsoft Teams for dialogue and collaboration, everybody wasn't popping on video. We'd kind of seen enough, we were just talk. And so now, that reliance on video and recorded video messages to really build that connection, because, our workforce is really seeking that connection in absence of being together in person. And I think the other shift that we have, that I have seen more of, is leveraging more technology to conduct what I call pulse checks, right, with our employees in real time, right? So we're kind of aggregating results to HR quickly, enabling us to respond and adapt in real time to employee sentiment. that wasn't something we were quite, leveraging as much prior to the pandemic that now we're doing almost weekly.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk a little bit more about things like pulse surveys, but just straight up communication, like Chris was saying about, needing to see somebody on video to just kind of, yes, I need to lay eyes on you to make sure that you're real and not just this disembodied voice. Joey, you had started to talk about that as well. I mean, did you see that communications got more informal, if that's the right word, as things were changing?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I joined my company in the middle of the pandemic. And so I don't have, but I was at a company where everybody was remote and everything was done through video meetings, literally everything. So, and they wanted you to be on video because that was the only way you really connected with people at that other company. So coming into LumApps was interesting because I didn't physically get to meet anybody. I did everything through video. And I was in New York, so I live in New York City, and I was in New York City for an SKO. I was doing it remotely from home, so I didn't want to go into an office with people because I was still, nervous about COVID. But I finally went to meet some people for dinner, and it was amazing how you just don't even understand like how tall people are, how short people are. Like the physical aspect is really like from here up. And so I met this one guy, and he was like really tall. I thought it was just interesting. So it made me start to think about the fact that even though as a software company, you're working with technology all the time. And as someone who's been a remote worker since 1998, I've done a lot of that. But on the sales side, when you're out meeting people and trying to work with them, it's very difficult now I think it's difficult for both the prospects and customers and for salespeople, because you're shifting into a new paradigm of trying to engage somebody, but you're only now boxed into a meeting in a video. You can't go to dinner. You can't do the normal things you would do to sort of like engage with that person or that prospect. And it does definitely bring a challenge. And so, and what I've also noticed is that when you're dealing with people in sales, a lot of times they will go off camera, and you kind of want them to come back in, because then you have no idea, are they paying attention to to what you're talking about? Do they get it? Do they not get it? And you have to, and so it's also getting people to start to be more conversational in their approach to presentation, because engaging somebody in the conversation, I've always done that anyway when I try to get, when I'm in front of people, it becomes much more obvious and apparent that you need to do it, because you have to get the feedback if you're not going to get a physical like view of the person. So, yeah.
Well, Micha, you said that your team was remote already. So did you have an easy time of transitioning, or did you notice that, certain things needed to be bumped up or scaled back?
Yeah, so we did have some changes, and yes, my team is virtual, but we work with clients on a regular basis. So prior to COVID, we were on site with our clients to kick off with them. So we got to meet them, see them, kind of create that bond with them. And although we did use and still do use a variety of different software to communicate, we never really pushed people to turn their cameras on, to engage in this way. And now we ask all of our consultants to make sure that their cameras are on. And we use a variety of different things. One of our favorites is Microsoft Teams, is a great collaborative tool all the way around. It just has so much functionality. With our clients, if they use Teams, we use Teams with them, Zoom meetings, those types of things. But for the most part, engaging with people, that you are working with, we do things like discovery sessions with our clients, which typically we would be on site for like 3 or 4 days doing all of that discovery. So we found that it has been a difficult transition to get people to stay focused for 4 days on camera. So there have been some struggles, but I do think this is something that's going to change the way we do business long term. The travel, I think, even when we're allowed to travel, will be a lot less than what it was prior.
I think that's probably true. I mean, if you can do it without spending money and time getting toing and froing, as it were, then why wouldn't you? But it's interesting that you brought up collaboration, because if there's one thing that I keep hearing, it's about collaboration is suffering. You don't have the ability to just run into somebody somewhere and just strike up a conversation, and that sparks an idea, and so on and so forth. And people are less likely to, speak up in meetings if they're just in this little virtual grid of faces. So my question to you all is, how are you encouraging collaboration? Is that even happening? And does it happen in video meetings, or does it happen in things like chats, either on mobile or something like that? Laura, you want to take that one first?
Sure, I'd be happy to, because you're spot on, right? I mean, I was thinking about your question earlier about sort of the formality of dialogue and meetings, and what I have found is that the formality, I'm not sure that the content itself has changed from more formal or informal, but what I have found is that people are getting very quickly overscheduled. We are scheduling time with people instead of bumping into them in the office or having a coffee and having the right kind of conversations. So in terms of, encouraging collaboration, and again, I know I'm clearly very biased on the Microsoft suite of technologies, but in addition to the virtual meetings that we've all talked about, we are encouraging it through kind of two other key means. One of which is the use of, Microsoft Teams, or these not team meetings, but team spaces. So that, for example, if we are working on a project in particular focused on engagement, we might have an engagement team space where everyone is invited just to that team space. It's private amongst the team members, and we can chat and go back and forth. And it also encourages and allows collaboration at the time that is most convenient for each individual user. So that's part of the challenge with collaboration these days is we cannot be overscheduled for 10 hours a day. So allowing sort of chats and back and forth in a shared space that people may pick up an hour later or, the next day, but it continues the dialogue, it's still very effective. And then the third is the use of Microsoft Sharepoint, which again, it's that same notion of, we've really perpetuated this view of we've got to allow employees to figure out how to better integrate work and life. And so collaboration now doesn't always mean getting into a room and doing it within a specific time-boxed period. It means figuring out how to balance your home and work life, your kids that you're homeschooling, other things of that nature, and still being able to collaborate with your peers in different time zones or in different locations. And so Microsoft Sharepoint is another technology that we utilize a lot, where you can share, living documents, right? And so I could finish editing something at 3 o'clock, go off and go to a meeting or something else. Someone else, Christine or someone could come in and start editing the document and, and track the changes and those things. So that what we've really seen with the shift in collaboration is that collaboration doesn't have to be real time, all in one place. It can be over time, utilizing technology to enable it.
The asynchronous piece is fascinating to me because, when you think about traditional means of doing this, it's usually on a whiteboard. And, yes, there are virtual whiteboards, but anyway, I'm curious to hear what you have to say, Chris.
So I will also give a props to Teams. Thank you, Laura. We had just installed Teams before this all happened. And honestly, we were not fully on board with it. People weren't comfortable with it. And so very quickly we decided this is the platform we all need to use, because it does offer the main reason was because of the offerings for collaboration. And so these team chats and things that ways you can communicate beyond when you're just in a meeting. And I think what also happened pretty quickly was we decided we had to form a cross-functional team from representatives from departments all over the company to figure out meetings, and not just meetings, but any type of collaboration, communication, because it was all changing. And so I co-lead that. And what we learned is that we needed to put out some best practices related to collaboration, and people aren't always wanting to speak up in a video meeting, especially because you trip on each other and it can be awkward. And so, we put together some very kind of obvious, but needed to be said best practices, like, the basics, like have your camera on, but things like if you're someone's got to host, someone's got to be the moderator. And it's your job as the moderator to call on that person that maybe you haven't heard from yet and give them the opening. Because in person, it's a lot easier to kind of play off each other. And so what we did that pretty quickly was like give people permission. Give them permission to have an agenda and to speak up, but also to decline meetings. So we know your schedule is packed and you don't always need 3 people from the same department to collaborate. You need 1. So that was another thing. We really, things that we'd always kind of thought we were doing, we learned quickly we were not. And so putting those all on paper in front of our team and then giving them the tools to do things more efficiently has been really impactful for us.
Joey, I'm going to go to you next, just because I want to hear it both internally and externally with your clients from what you've seen.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So LumApps is a collaboration platform and an intranet, all sort of rolled together. And I came from I've been in the collaboration space since 2008. And what I found interesting about, again, as a technologist, this hasn't been a big shift for me because I've been used to having this asynchronous collaboration as well as real-time collaboration, which you do in Teams, and you can do on other platforms, and you can do on comments on a document, right? There's all sorts of ways people are collaborating, and I think part of it is trying to not only allow them to do that collaboration, but figure out a way to get that collaboration to become meaningful to the organization, right? So you can have all these channels and all these chats and things that are happening, but at some point you've also got to try to figure out technologically how you make sense of that for the organization so that knowledge isn't lost. It's being persisted in these chat areas, but it's still kind of getting lost because they're so big. I mean, you're not going to go back and read through 1 million posts on a system. So I think that's one of the things that I know Microsoft is trying to solve, and actually Microsoft with Cortex has done some really interesting things, and other companies are trying to solve. What we find with our customers, so the collaboration company I worked for before had both internal and external collaboration suites. So you could collaborate internally, you can collaborate with your customers, partners, etc. And we do something similar. We actually have a place called the Hive, which is where we establish a community for our customers to interact with each other, but also with us, and for our partners to interact with each other and also with us and potentially with our customers. And I think what happens, and someone mentioned that they can also, you can also do this with things like Teams where you interact with people outside your organization within your team or a Slack channel, etc. So I do think that that's what's been interesting to me, is that those channels become like the sort of the standard way of doing sort of the day-to-day and getting feedback. But I also think that from my perspective, I've been doing, although I was doing a lot of meetings, like video meetings with people before, I'm doing lots and lots of meetings now. And every time I want to meet with one of my peers or one of my direct reports, we always have to do a video meeting because it's really the only way for us to connect in a personal way. And when I'm working with existing customers or working with prospects, again, we try to set rules to say, hey, if you're going to join this meeting, please be on video. You can't get everyone to do that, obviously, because some people just are too shy. So I do think I think that both the internal external is a big shift. I think that, like someone else said, that this is going to change the way that a lot of people work going forward. I don't know that from a sales perspective, it's going to change you. The moment people can start traveling again, they're going to go out and start traveling because they want to see people in person. But yeah, it's really interesting to see how the technology can really enable those things. But if you think about the technology in total, it can start to like erode the knowledge a little bit because it's hard to find things over time within the organization.
Fascinating. We are bumping up on to the 30-minute mark, so we're going to pause briefly, have Steve do our little commercial break, then we'll get back to Micha and Jamie.
Thanks, Lydia. Hi again, everyone. I'd like to remind anyone joining our webinar in midstream that we're from day one, and we're exploring how technology is changing employee experience. Our sponsors are LumApps and AceUp. As a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A session at the top of the hour. Now back to you, Lydia.
Thank you. So I have slightly different questions for the two of you. For Micah specifically, how did you decide which suite of tools to use? I mean, because it was kind of a no-brainer for some of our other panelists. They already had things in play or partnerships in place. So what was that like for you, and what factors were most important to you when you were choosing?
So we looked at a variety of different tools, and we did, look to see what our clients were using, because again, most of our interaction is with clients. We speak to them every day, and sometimes for hours on end every day. And we decided to use Teams, and we had already had Teams, but we weren't using it to the extent that we could have. And again, just because there's so many different things that you can do with Teams to collaborate. So it's not just in the meeting, folks ask questions, we drop documents, all of those types of things. So we thought that was a great tool for us to use. Internally, we Skype each other like crazy. So we are instant messaging all the time, and we continue to do that. With respect to, video conferencing for clients, again, if they use Teams, we'll use Teams. We were using GoToMeeting, but right after the pandemic, there was a decision, which I was not included in on, to move to Zoom. So, the Zoom meetings are great. I don't know that it's always the best situation when folks are on video. I don't know about you guys, but I am constantly getting those little warning messages that it's using up too much space, and sometimes I drop. So if I disappear from here, you'll know why. But that, realistically, just what's secure, ease of use for not only us, but for our clients. And what do our clients use so that they don't have to continuously download and install different software.
Well, Jamie, your expertise is, at least in part, in employee development and training. So I'm just wondering how the technology is factoring into this, because usually these things used to take place in person as well. So how do you do it now?
Yeah, we used to have week-long sessions. I run some talent development programs, and then, thinking about succession planning. And actually, Joey, we were doing a sales training earlier today where we had, 900 associates on a quick Zoom virtual meeting, teaching them actually how to continue to push Zoom with our customers, right? Because if you think about having a multi-generational workforce, where a lot of our sales force in particular is more on the baby boomer side, it has been a lot of heavy lifting to teach them some of the tools, because like as a business, we prided ourselves on our first order ever is on this 2x4 at one of our original branches, and it's written on a piece of wood, and trying to teach them, just pull up your iPhone and make sure your video camera is pointed in the right direction, and some of that. So we've been really focusing on kind of teaching them the technology and showing them how to leverage it to the best. And then to your point on the connectivity, it's a lot of our branches didn't have like cameras in them or computers for some of the associates to use for training. And so for some of the development programs, I had associates all over the US and Canada. And so we would have to send them web cameras, right, to attach to the branch computer so that they could be able to connect with other associates. And so it really is shifting the way we reach out to each other, because now they have cameras, right, where they didn't have them before, and they're using their iPhones and they're understanding kind of how to leverage this technology. And so it has been great for my training budget, because there's a lot less travel that I have to pay for, and hotels and all of that. But it's also been a lot easier to fit it into existing meeting cadences, because like you all said, there is a lot going on with everyone these days, and the calendars seem to get full. But hey, you can fit like 10 additional minutes on how to leverage this capability in connecting more with your customer or your associates to drive that engagement a lot easier than kind of having to block out more time for it.
Well, the other piece of that isn't just the training on how to use the technology, how to leverage it to the best of its ability and the individual's ability, but It's also about how you talk to each other. And almost every single panel I've done since April, everyone's been talking about doing these check-ins and how you can engage people. If you're in this little square, how can you get them to say, how are you really doing? So are you doing any training around effective virtual communication? Jamie, I'm going to go right to you first because I want you to finish up that thought.
Yes. Well, no, and it did make me think of that. So that is something that we have been pushing too around. We did some pulse surveying to try and understand how our associates were feeling, and kind of having those touch points with the managers on how to stay connected. So I know Chris mentioned some, toolkits around, how do you connect with people and how do you engage? We definitely had that ahead of time, but it's even teaching them that you should be having, as cheesy as it sounds, those virtual happy hours, or like, some teams telling them, hey, let's do some development sessions with your team. So, my team, I'll schedule, like I really got into a sourdough kick at the beginning of the pandemic. And so we had
you and millions of others.
Yeah, I sent them some starter and we all learned how to, refresh the starter together on a virtual Zoom. And then we would record it and send it out to other teams who were interested. So it's more of just being intentional and making sure that, hey, don't forget that you still should have those regular one-on-ones, that you should have those team development sessions. And now it's better than ever, right? Because you are all kind of stuck separate and you don't want to lose that touch with each other. Just reminding them of that for sure.
Chris?
So I oversee, we for many years have done a more traditional employee engagement survey. Once a year, there's like 20 some statements. And then we work all year to kind of do an action plan off of that. And I think this year more than ever, those pulse checks outside of the one big survey became more important. So I know we did one in like that April timeframe when everyone was feeling a little like, how we doing here? And sometimes it's not just the answer, it's just being asked. Employees want to feel like they have an opportunity to say, whether it's good or bad. And so we had like a crazy, close to 90% participation rate in our surveys this year. And I think it's because people just want to be heard. And so those pulses were more like well-being checks. So in the past, we pick more of a, let's ask about communication. They were like very segmented. We have one going out on Monday that's literally a check on your well-being. We just want to know people feel supported, that they feel okay. And if they don't, then we can narrow it down by department and say, okay, this department is sinking. What's going on? Is there a leader problem? Is there a workload problem? And so I think we're just being, I think someone else used the word intentional, much more intentional in some ways, but then not as pointed in the, what is the topic? It's more just, how are you? And that real, we always say our people come first, the safety of them, our well-being, and it's reminding people of that. So those pulse surveys have been really good data for us to get, but also I know our employees have been very grateful to have the opportunity to voice how they're doing.
I'm just wondering at this point what technology is being used for those surveys, and more importantly, how often should they be done? Because I'm sure there's such thing as survey fatigue, just like there's
totally
video meeting fatigue.
Yeah,
so
that's why
best practice.
Yeah, we use a vendor called Energage. We've used them for many years. And so they send out the surveys on our behalf via email. And we typically have our pulse surveys. Our one that's going out on Monday is 3 statements. You rank it 1 to 6. You get a conditional question based on your response. It's optional if you want to put a comment in. So it takes minutes. I think it needs to be quick. And we believe the right cadence is like we survey, meaning either a pulse or like the main big employee engagement survey once a quarter. However, that's company-wide. We encourage our departments to do their own little pulse checks through the same platform, through Energage, they can do them monthly. They can do them even more often if they feel like they need to. And we let our leaders decide that. So company-wide, we do quarterly, but leaders in some teams may do more.
I'm curious about measuring not just engagement and sentiment like that, but also productivity and performance. And we know that longer hours does not always equate to a more productive worker. So has there been a shift in A, the technology you use to measure these things, and B, how you're measuring them? Big question. I know, who wants to take that one first? Otherwise, I'll call on somebody. Joey, you're smiling big, so I'm going to you
Well,
first.
I would say I would take it on, but I'm not in any way related to like how our company's actually measuring productivity. But what I will say is that we do. So what I found interesting about what we're doing here is that, and I had never experienced this as a company, tech companies tend to try to build pretty good cultures among their employees. I mean, I think it's built into the DNA. You're a software company, you're sort of all working towards the same goal, and then you're also trying to like get people to use your software. So, so I think that the benefit a software company has during a time like this is that they've already sort of got things in place that will help with that cultural sort of like shift. And if it goes into technology, people are sort of aware of getting to technology. But I would say that on the fatigue around surveys, I've noticed that every month I'm getting a survey to ask me how I'm doing and whether I think the company feels that I feel that they look after my safety and that I have a good life work balance and like can be healthy during my time, during the time at work. And I always answer yes, because I've always been a remote worker for such a long time that I take the time. I know to take time to go out and run or take a walk or do something and not just sit in front of my computer. But like everyone said, I'm also seeing that I'm getting like slammed all day long with all these meetings from people. And they're like half-hour meetings, like to catch up or to talk about some specific topic that always bleed into the next meeting. So again, we use Peakon to do the surveys, and we're getting about an 88%. I asked the head of HR while we're doing this. So good. Again, technology allows me to reach out to somebody very quickly and get an answer. But we get an 88% response on that. And I could probably find out about productivity, but unfortunately I don't have those numbers.
Well, is anyone else measuring productivity either differently or the same? Laura?
Sure. Well, kind of as Joey said, I mean, we have our standard productivity metrics that apply to our client-facing population that haven't changed, and that's really chargeability, right? How much time we're charging to our clients. For our sellers, it is the outcome, right, of their sales. For delivery, it is the outcome of their revenue managed. Those metrics haven't changed. We certainly did see some adjustments in terms of expectations early on, because as our clients were finding their own way through this, we saw a lack of, or a drop in chargeability. And so then we had to kind of manage our workforce in a different way. We haven't changed that, but one of so from a technology perspective, one of the other things that we've done from a productivity perspective are those people within our workforce that don't have the chargeability targets or the sales targets, for example, corporate functions. It's harder to measure. And so we have introduced and launched what we call alternative ways of working, which enable people to, again, work 4 days, 10 hours, have a day off or afternoon, off, and like to create these flexible working schedules with some parameters around them. And within the pilot, so everyone who has chosen to opt in, we utilize the Microsoft Teams platform to send, to automate, it's called Flow, to automate this chat that is so I get every, once or twice a week, this thing that just has 2 questions on it that it's just radio buttons. Do you feel that you have been more or less productive this week? Do you have more or less time, right? To, have you accomplished what you set out to accomplish or not? Or the questions sometimes vary a bit, but it's really designed to kind of get at least the employee sentiment around, have I been more productive or less productive, and how am I feeling? And it's anonymous, so that there's not that fear of, if I say I haven't been that productive, is that going to be a bad thing on me? So that's how we're utilizing that as sort of this push. And we set the expectation for people that were participating in this alternative work schedule, that this is part of the sort of requirement or agreement that you make in doing that you will give us feedback so that we can get a better sentiment of whether this is working or creating just added pressures in your life, and you find that you're working 5 10-hour days instead of, having that extra day off.
I'm curious about what the performance review looks like now. Is there a technological way to do that? Like, in a survey, do managers fill out a type of pulse survey, or, is it just, instead of face-to-face, it's on Zoom? Micha, you were gonna jump in on that one, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah. So for us, at Hub, we were doing quarterly chats, but we just this year, and we're in the process right now of going back to more traditional performance review. We use our human capital management system to push out a request to put your goals in, as well as to do your self-evaluation. And then, the manager, of course, meets one-on-one via Zoom, which I've always done because I have a virtual team, to provide feedback. What we're seeing trending with our clients is a little bit different. I'm seeing more along the lines of what Christine and Laura spoke about, those pulse surveys, and with respect to actually doing, performance reviews in the traditional way, I'm seeing more and more clients kind of back out of that and do more, monthly chats, quarterly chats, just so that they're more engaged with their workforce on a regular basis. So yeah, I think that people are doing things differently, but still the same.
And here I thought performance reviews were dead. At least we've been reporting on that for a long time.
Yeah, it is kind of, from what I see with my clients, it's almost kind of a 50-50 split. Half of my clients we're not doing those traditional performance reviews anymore. We're going to be goals and, monthly, quarterly chats and those types of things. And then the other half of my clients are really just kind of sticking with that traditional self-evaluation, manager evaluation, and still with goals. I'm seeing a lot more clients use, like the goals feature in the human capital management system, because they're interactive. So, we set goals and for our staff, and the staff can literally go in and update their goals and say, hey, I'm done with this goal. And then, give their explanation. And then we can go in and say, well, maybe you really didn't finish this, and these are the other pieces. But that interaction, it may not be face-to-face, but interacting within their software to get their goals, talked about and accomplished.
Jamie, back to the leadership or the training and development piece. I'm just wondering how measuring the success of that factors into overall performance review, and how do you measure for the success of a training program now?
Yes, so we are still doing follow-up surveys, so really trying to look at the different levels, right, that we're hitting and targeting after. So following up with 30, 60, 90-day surveys and targeting, managers, hey, are you seeing this in application? How are you coaching to some of these skills that we're teaching? I would just go back to, again, we've been very intentional about what we are training on right now, and really targeting to specific populations where we know we can get quick lift, because it has been a bit hectic at my organization, because we went through a sale from our parent company, and then we are going through a merger with another company right now. So it has been, when you asked about productivity, I was like, it has been more productive than ever, but I don't know what I can show you to show you the numbers for that, because it's just been all hands on deck, and a constant, I would say, pivot because of just COVID and the sale and the merger, and who knows what's coming next month, but it's been very exciting. And so the training has been intentional, and we do follow up with surveying afterwards. And then, again, because we are now an independent company and we're establishing new values, our culture of a merged organization. And so thinking through what those new competencies look like and how to put them in a new We're moving to Workday. So if you can imagine the most amount of changes possible in a pandemic, that is what our organization is going through. And so we're just trying to be very focused when we do offer opportunities to associates, just to help them and to make sure that we can get that quick lift.
Well, and all that sort of toggles into well-being. And I know that a lot of these pulse surveys, yes, they measure sentiment, and yes, they measure if, you know, things are getting onerous, if you're feeling productive, if you're not. But when we're specifically talking about wellness, and especially during this time when so many people are turning to telehealth, especially for mental wellness, how are you measuring that? What technologies are you using? Or is that just a sort of simple face-to-face Zoom call? Laura?
I wouldn't say that we are necessarily measuring the wellness, but what we have done that we've just begun to implement over the past 2 months is implement what we call global wellness weeks. And what this is you think about at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was having social and happy hours. And so there was a lot of drinking going on, and there was a lot of after hours connection with people at work.
Oh, those quarantinis.
And that's not, like limited to my company, right? Like it's just everybody's like, that's the thing to do, right? You just kind of have a happy hour. Nobody knew what else to do. That's how we were going to connect. And that created some fatigue very quickly. I had a lot of people saying, hey, I like my work people, but I spend enough time with them, right? Like I don't want to feel pressured into doing that after work, or there's nothing to talk about. So what we designed were these well-being weeks where we sort of push out these very small chunks. They're topical. So each there's 1 week each month, and each one focuses on a specific aspect of well-being, whether that's mental or emotional or physical. So for example, this is our week. And so there are, chunk-sized, e-learning or, ways that people can engage, whether they want to read and learn about new things. But there's also, for example, earlier today, there's a 30-minute Teams meeting and they offer them in different time zones where you can join via video or not. And there's a facilitator that is actually focused on, with this one being physical well-being, showing like specific things that you can do in your home office, right? Just to, whether, just small exercises or stretches or breathing things. And everyone's encouraged to participate. And so it's just a different way of shifting our way of trying to connect and collaborate with people from just social interaction to actually let's collectively focus on our well-being. So like I said, we haven't measured it necessarily. I think we probably will or can, certainly, like what's the participation in these kinds of, well-being, meetings and then get some survey participation and things afterwards. But that's really been our focus, is to say that the way of interacting with people these days is it's not just social interaction that we need, but we need to take care of ourselves, and collectively committing to that is good for one another as well as for the company.
Love that the dog is on the call too now. This is the best part of these, is to see everybody's pets and whoever else is in the background. Sorry, Chris, you want to go next?
I love that idea, Laura. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's something that we're all trying to figure out. How do you measure, other than, asking, and maybe everyone's not going to be honest. And one thing that we tried a few weeks ago was we were feeling like we're putting a lot of weight on our leaders. So this is a certain level and above, but these are like the 150 folks in Ace Hardware that manage the rest, and so there's a lot of weight. They get a lot of information that we want them to share down, that we want them to check on their employees. We want them, it goes on. And so this is a really important group. They are leading our company and they're leading our people. And so we took a moment and we just had them, and we did it on Teams Live, so a slightly different platform. And we did the traditional, we meet with our leaders usually 3 times a year, usually in person. But we had our CEO speak, and he's a wonderful speaker, and he gave kind of a business update and then more of a personal kind of motivational. But then we brought in a keynote speaker, an outside speaker which we do at like our conventions, but we'd never really done A, virtually, or B, just for this group. And we had him talk about, he does a talk about being the calm person in the boat. And so really just acknowledging there's a lot on your shoulders, guys. And here's some tricks and tools to better yourself and be a better leader, and then help better your team. And he gave like a 45-minute keynote, and it was somewhat interactive and fun. But I think we just got the results of our survey today, what people thought about it, and people really loved it. It was something different. It was a little bit of a break. We've been hearing so much about our business, and yes, that is the mission of our company, but we need our people to feel healthy mentally. And so I think it was something we'll do again. And we heard like we would love to do another keynote. It was just not that people don't love hearing from our leaders, but it was just a different face, different voice, and kind of a change. So that's something that worked for us.
Anyone else want to chime in with some wellness strategies?
I mean, I would say we probably need to incorporate some of what Laura and Chris are doing at your organization. So I'm loving that I'm learning from you guys there on how you guys have rolled it out. We've used Big View. I don't know if you guys have heard of that app. It's kind of like the business TikTok, I guess. And so our COO will like make videos of himself and send it out to everyone and kind of try to make them, hey, how's everyone doing? Checking in. He's very focused on the associates and really trying to build the culture together as one company. But I love Chris about that keynote, and I love Laura about those wellness weeks. So that's definitely something I'm going to have to take back to our organization and see how we can incorporate some of that. So thanks for sharing.
It's always great when we get an ROI on this. Joey?
Yeah, I was just again chatting with the head of HR in the US, and again as an employee I see these things happening. So they do things like the employee assistance program is being promoted, and so we see that happen. And I think again, a lot of times technology companies are very different, but you do have people within the organization who, like you said, are don't want to be on video and don't want to really engage this way, and it becomes more isolating for some of those people. I've got people within my team that you think salespeople are completely outgoing, but a lot of times they're also introverts, right? And the other thing that I've noticed happening recently as well is that, and this is more about the culture and trying to get people engaged in something other than work, is that there's now this once a week there's a sort of midday, for us it's midday, for Europe it's late in the day. It's like a trivia or a game where anyone can join. They can do something completely social. And it's outside of the realm of like the happy hours, and the happy hours are interesting, but then you start to think about like what is the toll of that if that's happening a lot of times. How about have something that's more neutral, that is still fun and gets you out of your work mind for that hour, and then lets you get back into your work mind afterwards. And so those are some of the other programs that are happening. And I'm learning a lot here too, because as someone who's not in HR but who manages a team, it's giving me ideas about how I can also engage my team in different ways, because we tend to do a lot of it around our projects and work, and not enough of it maybe around just getting to know each other and engaging more socially, even though it's remote, because my entire team is also spread out. I mean, we're not co-located at all.
Well, we are at the top of the hour, which means that it's time to go to the audience questions. But before we do that, we're going to pause for another brief break. Steve?
Thanks, Lydia. And thanks to all of you who are participating in How Technology is Changing Employee Experience, and to our sponsors, LumApps and AceUp. At this time, we'll be responding to questions from our audience. You sent in a good bunch. So Lydia, back to you.
Thank you. So here's an interesting one from Michael, and we're talking about tools here. So maybe you all know about this, maybe you don't. Michael says, have or do any of you use a tool like Icebreaker.video? It allows for virtual speed networking. I've had at least 2 of these meetings for the company each month, and it helps to connect folks who you would ordinarily just bump into. Does anybody know about icebreaker video? No?
So we
Joe?
don't use that technology, but we have a program in our own technology in our communities that is Meet a Lumi, because we call ourselves Lumies. So it's similar because it means you can basically find somebody who you would never have connected with and across the world, and you can set up time to connect with them and find out what their job is and who they are. And so it is a great way to because you tend to isolate yourself into the groups that you can get stuff from and the people you start to get to know, and then you don't really look outside of that circle. And so so that sounds like a really great technology because it can automate that. We're doing it a little bit more manually by saying, hey, if you want to sign up to get in this program, you can do that, and then we'll match you up with somebody and get you connected to that person.
Anyone else have some icebreaker or speed networking type suggestions? Okay, well, here's a basic question from Anne, and I've heard this one before, and I think it bears repeating. I'm trying to get my organization to turn their cameras on. Not everyone does. Any pointers to get them to engage and turn it on? Higher level roles are not turning it on. That's surprising, but Laura, you want to start?
I'm not sure if I am going to be super helpful in the answer here, although, with that question, to me, the key point is if higher levels are not, they are setting the tone and expectation for the organization. So if they are not, their employees either aren't motivated or maybe even in some regards like fearful or don't want to put themselves out there because their leaders are not. So I will stop and allow my, colleagues to comment on maybe what they've done. I didn't have so much of a challenge with that just because our team was much more comfortable client facing. I know in different organizations, people have different styles. So our leaders have absolutely set the tone. And the higher the level of of leader that I meet with, the more 100% of them are always on video. And I tend to find that it actually reduces down the organization. But that was my initial reaction when I heard that question that said, gosh, if you're not having your leaders do it, it's not going to pervasively catch up as a cultural norm at all. And when I say you have your leaders, it doesn't mean that wasn't a statement of like, if you don't make your leaders do it, I don't know how you do that yet. But my point is, if they choose not to do it, then that will not become a cultural norm of the organization.
Yes, as a software vendor around collaboration, and collaboration was, coming into organizations back in the early aughts and then into the teens, it was very interesting to sell into an organization and really do the change management that it took to get people at the top to engage at that level with their employees. And so it's very interesting to hear that question, because part of what I've been selling for years now has been the promise of collaboration, but the fact that if you don't have your leadership visible or pushing at that same level, then you're not going to get the level of collaboration you expect to get from your employees. And that tends to be more sort of open collaboration. When you're talking about real-time stuff, that's easier because people can quickly connect with each other. So I do think that if whoever asked the question, you might have to look internally at like a change management process and see if there's a way to get that to like invoke into move up into the upper echelons of the organization and help them understand the importance and setting that tone for the company.
Yeah, I was going to echo that we had some higher ups not want to turn their video cameras on for some of the sessions, and it was finding a champion, that would kind of push on their peer. So if there's someone in your organization that is a proponent of it, talking with them about how do we get more engaged. That was, when we first kicked off Zoom kind of across the business. Now it is an expectation across the business, but we just had to get that change management in place for our company.
Anyone else with suggestions on engaging? We do have a dissenting opinion saying I don't actually think because someone has a camera off that they aren't engaged, which is totally true. Sometimes they feel more comfortable with the camera off, but are there, some parameters? I mean, Chris, you were talking about like basic sort of protocols in place.
Yeah, I think it's more the perception. It doesn't mean it's true, but it's certainly your perception. I mean, I even hear my kids' teacher saying, you know, your kids haven't had their cameras on. And I'm like, well, they're there, but there's a perception that they're goofing off. It's kind of the same thing when you can't see someone's face. And like I said, when we did our first kind of town hall with our CEO and it was just audio, we got a lot of feedback like, is he all right? Did something happen? You know, like people just want to see. I think there's great value there, but it does have to start at the top. And so we're lucky that we very quickly changed that, and our officer team is always on camera and they set the tone. But we did put out that best practices I talked about, and we did note that there are times when you don't want your camera on. So maybe it's that would help to say, here's ideally when you have it on, and here's sometimes when it's okay not to. And the way we differentiate it is like, if it's a large meeting, not everyone has to have their cameras on because that can be distracting. So really, if it's just the speaker. So if there's a set agenda and there's speakers, and then sometimes at the end, we'll say everyone turn their cameras on so you can see people or do Q&A that way. But during the speaking portions, we do tell people, turn off your cameras just because it's distracting. When it's a meeting of 2, 3, 4, 5 people and one person doesn't have it on, that can feel awkward. And so we really encourage cameras on. You can't force anyone, but I will say in our company, it's not really a problem anymore. And I think it's because we do lead by example and we make people feel comfortable, and people want to see each other's faces. So.
Go ahead, Laura.
I agree with everything that Chris said, and but one of the it is those sort of parameters, because you do want to give people space and comfort to feel okay. Like we have global calls, for example. There's some that I take at 6 a.m. or that my peer it's midnight, you know, and that's not ideal, but you shouldn't feel compelled. You know, do I really have to get up, you know, at 4:30 and be showered and ready? You know, like we do absolutely have parameters that it's like, hey, look, you know, if you're joining a call outside of business hours anyway. And, you know, like, don't feel compelled if you so choose not to, because we want you to manage your life and not feel pressure and discomfort. And I don't think that we view it as necessarily, I do agree with Chris that if it's pervasive and just somebody's always just not, and you're in a small group, like if we were like this and I was the only person that, you know, had my name here and everybody else was talking, it would feel weird. But I do think that creating those parameters for people where it is okay. And for us, it is often, you know, town halls, things like that. If you're a big speaker or you're leading a group, you turn your video on. But if you're joining, you know, a working session at 6 a.m., you don't have to. Or there've been times even with my team where I've said, you know what, the only time I could squeeze in 30 minutes on the treadmill was at lunch, and it's 12:30 now. I haven't showered, guys. I'm right here, but I don't want to turn on my camera, and that's okay. It's just not a pervasive thing where people always feel like, hey, Laura's never shows her face. Why not? Why, you know, is she disengaged?
Micah, I want to come to you just because I want the contrast of, you know, internal meetings, visual versus external meetings. I mean, you know, are you finding that externally you're able to see people face to face, or is that kind of come down a little bit too when people don't want to turn their camera on?
I actually think people are turning their cameras on more now than they were in the beginning. And I think part of it, even though it might sound a little bit silly, is that, you know, in my area and in a lot of areas, we couldn't get a haircut for months, right? So, you know, getting on camera looking, you know, like, well, we haven't been to the hairdresser in a while, was a little bit off-putting. And I personally am not a big hat person. You know, I have a lot of big hair and it just doesn't fit well into a hat. So now that things are open and folks are able to, you know, get their things done, I do see more and more that folks are turning on their camera, both, you know, internally and externally. And, you know, from my perspective, for my team, when we join a call with a client, if the client has their camera on and we don't, and we have never met them before, it just isn't the right look. You know what I mean? We feel that it's important that we see each other, meet each other face to face. But I agree. There are times I have clients on the West Coast that I have meetings at 8 o'clock at night. I prefer not to have my camera on. And then there's days where honestly, my hair just won't do anything but look ginormous. And so those days I try not to turn my camera on as often either.
You know, I thought, Lydia, there was just one other thought that came into my mind as I was listening to Micha, but I think another thing that can help people feel more comfortable, because I think we've seen this much more in the pandemic, is there used to be this sort of view that, hey, if you're at work, you need to be in this office space, nobody else needs to be around, you need to be focused. And I think that making it more of a norm, you know, so, you know, my daughter will come in, she's a teenager, but, you know, will come in and I'll, you know, mute for a second and hug her or say goodbye, or, you know, see people like, you know, Jamie picked up her dog, like making those kinds of just normal human interactions, because we're all trying to manage a life while working, and making that acceptable. I think that encourages more people to join via video too, is if they see their leadership in their home space, there's not a background that's, you know, or there's not, you know, or they never have anyone else around or distractions. You know, you hear people's dogs barking or the doorbell ring or their kids run in, and that's just normal. We're all dealing with that. And I think that the more we can make people feel comfortable that that's not a negative view on you, that is real life. And that actually creates a little bit more of that personal connection that we're kind of seeking, that we're not getting because we're not with people at work.
Go ahead, Jamie.
I was gonna say, Laura, I completely agree. I feel like I've learned so much about my coworkers, and it's been a way to kind of connect with people in another way. And Micha, to your point earlier, we would play the what kind of facial hair does so-and-so have game, you know, on different Zoom meetings, because people were getting very creative in the beginning of the pandemic. And I mean, I've changed my hair color multiple times because it's a pandemic. What are you going to do? So it's been that has also been kind of a what's going on in this person's life type of way to get people engaged and interactive in the Zoom calls, at least internally. And we call it, you know, at least within our team and our function, is we call it like when you're with your family. So like with your team, you can show up in your workout clothes, you know, if you have those early calls, or you can show up sweaty after a run or whatever. But, you know, when you're with a customer, you're client facing, you show up at least professional from the waist up. And so that's kind of how we've kind of operated with those norms too.
Does anybody brush their teeth before a Zoom meeting? Because I certainly do. Not that this is scratch and sniff, but big confession here. Okay, so moving on to, here's an important question, I think, for new employees, if anyone is hiring. How are you onboarding, and how do you provide the equipment? How do you interact with new team members and the people they need to meet? So I think there's a lot of best practices that can be shared here. If someone wants to take this one first.
Well, I onboarded as a new employee during this, and it was actually pretty streamlined. I mean, I had, so the way that they structured it here was that I had a 30, 60, 90 day meeting with HR, of course, but that was all done remotely. But then they quickly connected me to people, to key people within the organization, so that I could have real conversations with them, understand who they were, what their role was, have them help, you know, understand what my role was coming in. And I'm doing that now. I just hired somebody new, and I'm doing the same thing with him, is putting him through this, you know, onboarding process to, you know, to get him acclimated to the new organization. And it's actually worked out really well. The technology does lend itself to that, because like I said, the surprising thing when you meet people in person is more about their size than about anything else. Yeah, so I think I think from the perspective of someone who's gone through it, it was actually a pretty decent way to get on board and to meet people without physically ever meeting anybody within the organization until later.
Yeah, with particular regard to just getting equipment to people, though, like how does that work? I know that some of you mentioned, you know, not everyone has the same connectivity, and webcams needed to be provided. So what are some best practices for that?
One of the things that we do, and this is for not just new hires, but for everyone in the company, is we have an annual, we call it extended benefits. And it's a pool of money that is allocated to every employee. So it's basically just like a guaranteed sort of, you know, bonus or added employee that ranges by level between I think $1,000 or $1,500 up to $2,500. And the extended benefits are to be used to enable you to best manage your work life and balance that with your home. So when we, so as we faced the pandemic, we had a flood of people kind of saying, hey, I need a bigger monitor. I need a better camera. I need an ergonomic chair. I need, all of these things for my own well-being to enable me to do this. Or, I'm having to pay for a, more broadband, whatever the case may be. So what we have is, again, this simple, kind of pool of money that every employee gets, and they use it as they see fit. So for me, right, I didn't feel that I needed something, for example, for my, home office, but I felt that I needed something to help me, better manage my time, right? So I utilize mine, perhaps for, cleaning service or landscaping and things of that nature. But other employees have utilized it to equip their office at home with all of the things that they need. And that's an entitlement for new hires as well. And that gets us out of the business of having to, like, from HR, manage and deal with, everybody's request and being fair. And do people need this for medical reasons versus not? It's simply an allocation that everyone gets every year that they use for those purposes, or that's what we encourage them to use for.
Yeah, that sounds like a fair solution and less of a headache for all involved. Does anyone have anything else to add? Otherwise, I'll move on. Russ asks a question that's similar to what we've already discussed about different kinds of activities. What's your approach to team building events? In the past, where you had employee picnics and mixers, what are you replacing them with? So we talked about happy hours, obviously, but what about team building? Chris?
We have tried it all. So we have done everything from trivia breaks, kind of like Joey said, which have, we did one today and only had like 50 some folks on it. I think, well, it's the holidays, but in the beginning we had hundreds on them. So we do those every so often. We've done virtual bingo, which was a huge hit with fabulous prizes. It's always about the prizes. We've done virtual cooking classes. We've done things like around the holidays, like we did a virtual Easter bunny visit where people could have their kids come on and ask questions to the bunny. We've we kind of tried a lot of things, and here's my stance on those. Even if you don't participate, if you don't choose to, people like to know it's there. So they're grateful for the effort, that it was just even an option. It's not about the number necessarily people who did it, but just that it was out there. So we've also been lucky, here in Chicago. I know everyone's rules are different right now. Traditionally, we've done a lot for the holidays, and that was kind of a bummer this year. So we did, last weekend, we were able to do a private event at our zoo. So it was outdoor, and we had like time slots. People could bring their families though, and it was safe. We couldn't gather because no gatherings, but we had a spot where our team could come for cocoa, and we gave them some, treats, and that was a huge hit. So we kind of had to think outside the box. We'd never done anything, so we had to think about what is allowed right now, what is safe, outdoor, and we sold out of tickets. Which we were shocked. We had no idea if it would be a success or not. And so now we think it's going to be an annual event. So I think it's just trying and seeing what sticks. I had no idea that bingo would be such a big deal, but we normally have a very well-loved Employee Appreciation Week on campus where we do all sorts of fun things. And we had to do that virtually this year. So we mailed kits to, all 1,500 of our employees. They were not expecting it. So it was like a surprise and delight. And we included a bingo card in there. And here was the, where do you log in on this time and date? And so it's just trying different things. And again, you're not going to get everyone, but sometimes it's just knowing that you offered it.
Well, and, in times past, there was nothing worse than mandatory fun, even if it was in the spirit of team building. Just like,
agreed.
Do we really all want to get together and sing?
No.
So, but yeah, leaving it open to whoever wants to participate is a good idea. We have another technical question here from Donald. He wants to know about managing security. Are remote employees required to install a security software as a standard? Does the organization buy an enterprise license and furnish a download link to remote employees? Kind of a nitty-gritty question, but an important one. Does anybody know?
At Hub, we are all issued Hub laptops. And part of the Hub laptop is it has all the security features on it. And we actually remote into, the server. So yes, we are all required to have security settings. And again, it's easier because we all have a company laptop.
Anyone else? Security protocols?
Yep, same for us.
Further technology question. One of you mentioned baby boomers being challenged by new tech. Could you elaborate on the generational differences and how you bridge them? Like some young people are kind of judgy about tech they don't like. I don't know the answer to this question. I'm hoping that one of you does.
I mean, I think I mentioned the generations. Thankfully, we don't have any judgy or younger generations, or at least that I've heard from. I think our company tends to welcome, on the functional teams at least, welcome some of the new technology. Once we picked that platform, like Chris mentioned, where they were trying to decide at the beginning what to use. So once we picked Zoom as really the tool that we use for our meetings, for our trainings, for town halls, then everyone kind of jumped on board. I think where we really still are struggling is getting our sales force to leverage it to connect with clients, because it's not just teaching them, it's also teaching the clients who, or the customers who are probably in the same technological boat as our sales force. So it's teaching both sides of the conversation how to use the tool. And that again is just constant coaching and offering, drop-in hours. Like I mean, I take calls from sales account managers teaching them how to use the tool, just because it's, let's get all hands on deck, which maybe is not the most productive, but we're just trying to get everyone bought into Zoom at this point.
Chris, you want to add something?
I was just going to say, so we've been doing some Teams now that we've picked Teams as our go-to, because in the beginning we had 3 different platforms people were using. We had Skype, Teams, and Zoom, which was just a mess because you could never remember like which was which and which had these bells and whistles. So then we decided, all right, we're using Teams. So we took away, so we actually uninstalled Skype. And so that it wasn't, because that you always go to what you're most comfortable with. So we said, well, it's not there, you can't go to it. So then we said, if we're going to go with this, then we need to create trainings. So we hosted some live ones because everyone learns differently. So some people really prefer to have someone from our IT team literally like walking them through. And we said, keep it like, this is Teams 101, not 301, 101. Because people get overwhelmed. And so we did a few of those at different times and days, and we recorded them. So because some people don't want to be live, whatever, so they want to take it at their own pace. So we have a bunch of little videos, but they're hosted by people they probably would recognize from our IT team, which makes it a little easier than just your standard videos you could find online. But the other thing is that I learned at the beginning of this, we do a lot of communication with our store owners, and they're in hardware stores. They are not used to this technology. And so the first call I did with a group of our store owners, I was so excited to see their faces. And I was the only one who had even a camera option. Like they didn't know, they were used to like a conference call. And so I was like, oh, can you turn your cameras on? And they're like, well, not on my phone. Like they didn't quite understand what the concept was, because we're doing it every day. They're not. Not every audience is sitting in front of a computer all day. And so I learned then my next time I set one up, I explained it ahead of time. Like, I'd like everyone to be on video if you can, because I'll be sharing a PowerPoint, because that first call, I had a PowerPoint that no one could see. So I learned pretty quickly that with some audiences, like our hardware store owners, many of which are baby boomers, I needed to spell it out. Like, this is the expectation. If you can, this is how it's going to work. So, lesson learned.
Well, in the last few minutes I have here, I have a delightful question from Andy, which is lending itself to a speed round. So I'm going to come to all of you with this question. How will your experiences and learnings this year impact the employee experience further into the future after the pandemic ends? From your mouth to the universe's ears, Andy. We hope that this is over soon, but what learnings and experiences are going to impact the employee experience going forward? So let's go around. Micha, we'll start with you.
Well, that's kind of a tough one. I think that we have all learned that we can work remotely, that we can still engage with folks without being in the same room with them. Personally, I think I've learned that maybe I don't have to travel as much to see, to visit with clients to get my work done, which would save them money and make me more productive. And I think that just the way that we do business because of this will be forever changed. I wonder how many of my clients will never return to a brick and mortar. How many folks will end up being permanently remote. And from talking to my clients, a lot of my clients with offices in large metropolitan areas really don't have any plans on going back. So I think we've learned a lot, but I don't think it's over yet.
Jamie, want to go next? Speed round.
Yes, I would echo those sentiments exactly, and I think, if anything, the most we've probably learned is that we're all human. I think before it was, we had to put our corporate face on and you show up at 7:38, and you're focused on the job. And I think people have started to relax those boundaries. And so one of the things I've joked with my boss is, we have to make bring your dog to work day every day going forward, because these pets are really going to struggle without having their owners home all the time. So just trying to remember that at the end of the day, we're all human and we have a life to live too. So.
Laura?
I agree with everything I've heard. And I think the one add is that we have determined that going forward, we will provide more flexible options for our employees, period. Some choose and want to work in offices. We want to be able to provide that. Some want to work remotely. We now know we can do that. We want to be able to provide that. So I think we realize that we don't have to have a single solution and a single sort of, corporate way of engaging to be productive and get work done.
Chris?
I would agree. Flexibility is definitely something that I think we're all going to have to look at. I think for us, our mantra has always been, we always say together we are ACE. And this year we added stronger together. And I think we've talked about that in a different way, that it's not just about the business. We've become a closer family because we see each other day in and day out. And you're seeing pets and kids, and I think we're relying on each other in a different way that has brought us even closer, and that we need each other. And so that meaningfulness, that connection, trying to keep that going. We always say, we shine the brightest on the darkest days. When there's a hurricane, we're all in. How do we do that in a non-pandemic time? How do we keep that momentum going that we really built this year? So I think it's taught us a lot about communication and information and the needs of our employees, things that we didn't realize their importance.
Last but not least, Joey in the Northern Lights.
That's right. We'll all be able to work in the Northern Lights. I do. So I think there's two things that I think are important. One is that the idea that you have to have people in a specific location to work for you is going to change. It's already changed in a lot of technology companies because technology lends itself to that. But I think it's going to affect other industries as well, because they're going to find that they can get really great people that don't have to be in a location, because they now have the technology and we have the bandwidth to really support that kind of work, remote work. That's a really important thing to think about too. Is bandwidth before COVID was okay. Has gotten better. But if this had happened 10 years ago, this would be really difficult to work from home because we wouldn't have the ability to do like this video stuff, etc. I also think that the trend for a lot of people before COVID was already that technology was driving them to work longer hours because it's immediate, it's in your phone, it's in your hand, it's like constantly there. And so I think the benefit of knowing how that affects everybody in the organization means that the things we talked about that are more about your life work balance and about making sure you understand if your employees are actually well and mentally well is probably going to be a trend that continues forward. And I think that's a benefit because even though right now more people are, like the statistics about the number of people who are on teams right now, I think it was sort of a hidden thing. And people just were getting used to working on the weekends and working at night and working in the morning and working during lunch and doing all that kind of stuff. So I think a benefit for the employee is going to be more sensitivity to that particular part of your job.
I would agree. And that is our time. So for those of you who did not get your questions answered, or if you had questions for specific panelists, please feel free to reach out via LinkedIn or via the individual's organization website. We're happy to take your questions and your connections. Thank you for being with us. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Lydia, and our speakers. That was a really candid conversation about humans and how they respond to technology. I heard a lot of brand names that I want to find out more about. Thanks again to our sponsors, LumApps and AceUp, and to all of you for participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, and check out more of our upcoming webinars. On Tuesday, December 15th, we'll be doing our fifth full-scale virtual conference. The focus is on inclusive leadership in 2021, creating diversity, accountability, and real equity. Visit our website to learn more. And on Thursday, December 17th, how to foster cultural continuity during an extended crisis. Thanks, everyone. Stay well.